reaches, throws that ball's out, that's live! Back the other way, Sam Hubbard! The Cincinnati Kid! Hubbard's got a convoy! Chased by Andrews! At the 30, the 20, he will score!
To the end zone, down the field, and it is deflected, and gone! Touchdown! A.J. Green!
Over goes back to throw, men are coming late, looks right down the middle, there's Eddie Brown, he has it at the 35 to the 30, he may go, 10-5, touchdown!
Now the Bengals Super Bowl chances rest on his right foot. The kick is up.
Yeah.
It is good!
Corey Dillon, he's gone. The knockout punch, you're looking at it. 65 yards. And they're back to throw as the blitz is on. Goes long, intended for Collinsworth. He has it down to the 20, touchdown! And Chris Collinsworth.
Throwing the long ball. Deep down the field. Johnson's got it. Touchdown, Cincinnati.
Look at Chase go! Oh my goodness, what a gear he just found! Chase for the touchdown! Wow, Chase is on the case!
It is no fluke. It is a fact. The Cincinnati Bengals are headed to Super Bowl 56. The play clock at 3. Shotgun snap. Carr throws into traffic. Intercepted. Jermaine Pratt has the football.
Yeah.
Coffin nails.
Bam, bam, bam! How about that?
Welcome into the offseason, I guess. We're still going to recap the regular season. Bengals did end their season with a win, but it feels like I've lived 2 or 3 lifetimes since Saturday night. Reed, thank you for joining me on the last show of, I guess, technically the regular season, but we know it is offseason now for our Cincinnati Bengals.
Yeah, absolutely. I am happy to be here. I'm here from my wife's makeup room. It's the $1 million studio sponsored by Ulta. My phone's propped up by a wine holder, but we're ready to rock. It feels like I've shoestringed a show together, shoestring a setup together, much like the Bengals seem to shoestring a franchise and just roll them all out there on the first week of September. But hey, we ended on a high note, which is on par with what the Bengals have done the last few years. It just, once again, came up short. That's right.
And they come up short, and something that makes me and you look a little bit silly is that slow start comes back to bite them at the end of the year and ends up keeping them out of the playoffs with the Week 1 loss to the Patriots that I feel like everyone's pointing to right now. But before we get into the offseason outlook and what all happened on Sunday, the Bengals beat the Steelers. And I know with everything that was on the line and everything else that the Bengals needed to happen to get in, it didn't feel like a huge win on Saturday night, but it's always monumental to beat the Steelers, and it's always even bigger to win there. We haven't done that a lot, especially recently, and it means a lot to win in Pittsburgh. And I think it's important for Bengals fans to, I don't want to say hang your hat anywhere in a 9-8 season, but to win a game in Pittsburgh to wrap up this season, I think it's about as meaningful as a win can be when you still miss the playoffs.
If I ever got a BetterHelp or a Help Me Whatever, that online therapy subscription model is, if I ever get a subscription to that, it'll fully be because of the Bengals' relationship with the Steelers, because it has haunted me for 20 years. And I will never, ever, 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 ever want to, it doesn't matter if we're trying to tank or whatever, I will never want to, lose to the Steelers, and I will never take beating the Steelers for granted. I mean, there are 21 consecutive winning seasons. You've always got to cherish those. And I believe you guys were talking on the show last week about what you wanted most to happen in that final week, whether it be like, oh, we wanted Carson Wentz to show up, or we wanted Aaron Rodgers. The answer was always beat the Steelers by 1 billion points. That didn't happen. It didn't look always pretty, but it's the NFL, so it doesn't matter how you get there as long as you get there. We got to win, and I will never, ever, once again, never take that for granted.
Bengals got to win the same way they've gotten most of their wins this year, and it was the play of the star players. Joe Burrow didn't light up the stat sheet like he normally does, but 277 and a touchdown on 45 pass attempts is certainly nothing to turn your nose at. And Jamar Chase extended and inevitably won the Triple Crown with his performance on Saturday night. 10 catches for 96 yards and a touchdown. And then the biggest name, obviously, on the other side of the ball, who had one of the better games of his entire career, Trey Hendrickson, 3.5 sacks, cementing his lead. That's right, point to the sky, cementing his lead as or his place, I should say, as the league leader in sacks this year. He's under contract next year. Jamar Chase, obviously, one of the big contract extension topics of this offseason, but it's nice, even though the Bengals finished 9-8 this year, to be able to believe in your star players. We've seen around the league at various points in times for however many different contenders, star players vanish in big games, and the Bengals played a lot of big games this year, starting the season how they did, and finding a way to finish where we still had belief going into the last day of the regular season, and it was because of these stars, and it was no different on Saturday night. Trey Hendrickson with an unbelievable game, Jamar Chase as well, and this is the type of thing that you need to build around. We talk about the holes on this team a lot and where we're headed, but it's games like Saturday night that reminds you that having a couple stars and key cornerstone pieces can make you a lot closer than you seem at any given point. And I think the Bengals, with play like that from Trey Hendrickson and even a couple big plays down the stretch from guys like Cam Taylor-Britt and DJ Ivey, young players getting in the game now later in the season and kind of coming into their own. I think these last couple weeks, and especially Saturday night when we don't win that game without the defense, I think this has been a good sign for things to come.
Listen, one thing that we've always known about the NFL is that stars win games. Like they win the big games, right? Because like the Steelers will continue to win, have a over 500 record because they're well ran, they're well coached, all these things. They believe in themselves. But there's a reason they lost their last 4 games of the year, and it's because they don't have a whole lot of star power. And you buried the lead a little bit there. I know you said that's one of Trey Hendrickson's better games of his career. That was the best game of Trey Hendrickson's career by far. And Trey Hendrickson's been a phenomenal player throughout his entire tenure here in Cincinnati. I've always said the thing about Trey is that I don't know if he necessarily strikes the fear into other teams the same way that, like, when we're getting ready to play the Steelers, oh, what are we going to do about TJ Watt? The same way that when we're getting ready to play the Browns, what are we going to do about Myles Garrett? Trey Hendrickson gets a million sacks every single year, but I don't think he strikes the fear into other teams. He did on Saturday. He did. That was the best game of his career. Every time Russell Wilson dropped back, he had to be aware of where Trey Hendrickson was. He showed up in the right time. The one thing that I will say, as a Bengals fan over the last few years, in the Joe Burrow era, and I'm unapologetically a sycophant of Joe Burrow. Like, everyone knows that. Anyone that's ever seen me talk about the Bengals knows that I'll defend the Bengals, defend Joe Burrow, tooth and nail pretty much every chance I get. And I get tired of people saying, oh, during those playoff runs, Joe wasn't that good. The offense wasn't that good. And it drove me up a wall. I am glad to be there again. I will take that because that's what happened on Saturday. They scored 5 times, 4 field goals, and for the first time all year, because I think they led the NFL in touchdown percentage in the red zone. I don't know if they still do after that performance because they were 4 for 5 or 1 for 5, however you want to look at that, glass half full, half empty. But it was good to be talking about that again. It was good to be opening up certain talk shows and being like, I don't know. Every time this Bengals team has a chance to put one away, they just don't get there. I'm okay with that because as long as there's more points on the Bengals side of the scoreboard than the other team, I really doesn't care. We'll deal with the talking points after the game.
It is crazy that the final game of this Bengals season came down to a defensive performance after the talking points for the previous 17, 18 weeks, that this team just couldn't do it, that we didn't have the talent on the defensive side of the ball. And over the last 5 weeks, this Bengals defense ranked in the top 15, which is the barometer we put on them all year long. Be in the top half, and we'll be able to compete, and that's what we saw down the stretch. You can point to the level of competition in the first 3 weeks of this 5-game win streak. Absolutely, that is certainly warranted. But these last 2 games that the Bengals won in overtime against the Broncos and then against the Steelers this week, those are 2 playoff teams. Those are 2 teams that, whether we like it or not, are right there on the level with the Cincinnati Bengals this season. And the Bengals came out on top. And if you look back earlier in the year, there's so many different points that you can look at and say, if the Bengals defense just played like they did against the Steelers or against the Broncos or against the Cowboys or Titans or Browns, then this Bengals team has another win in their back pocket, and they're probably going to the playoffs. And that's kind of where I started this. The front office didn't seem to buy into the dead cat bounce by firing Lou Anarumo and a lot of the other defensive coaches at the end of this season, but I think I'm starting to. Do you have any faith in some of these players that bounced back and had better performances in these last couple weeks, given we're going to have a new coordinator and a couple new position coaches?
How could you not? It's a shame that the season's ending now, right? Because so much about being an athlete, so much about being, even at the professional level, is confidence. Like that's why coaches, assistant coaches, one of their main jobs is to instill confidence in you that you can get these jobs done, that you can continue to do those things. It stinks that, hey, you're playing your best football. You can take that into the next year. You can take that confidence. You're like, this is how I was playing. This is what was working. But it does stink that you don't get to just keep rolling it over and keep building upon it. We played a lot of bad teams at the end of the year. On that 5-game win streak, played Cooper Rush. We played DTR. We play obviously the Broncos and the Steelers are playoff teams. I'm drawing a blank on who the fifth team is.
The Will Levis, Mason Rudolph two-headed monster.
Yeah, don't sleep on Will Levis. I think he's 1 or 2 pick sixes away from really doing some real winning.
You're probably right. You're probably right.
And we can say the Steelers are a playoff team, which they are. They haven't been offensively inclined since the 70s, maybe. I don't know.
Except for when they played the Bengals the first time.
That's right. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that probably was the nail in the coffin for Lou Anarumo. Right. That probably was the exact moment where you see a dump pass to Najee Harris go for 13 yards. And what do they do the exact same play? The next play is the exact same play. 15 yards to Najee Harris, 15 yards to Jalen Warren, just a dump pass to the running back, to where you look at him. And that was the thing about Lou, and I know we're going to talk about the coaching changes here in a little bit. The calling card of Lou Anarumo was always he can make adjustments, right?
Right.
During the playoff runs, during that 25-game period where the Bengals defense was a top 10 in the league, and everyone's like, man, you don't know these players, but this is a really good defense. Like, we didn't have the star power of the TJ Watts, Myles Garrett, but this defense was playing at a very high level, was we weren't giving up second-half touchdowns. And I think even Trace would make fun of us at Chatterbox, be like, oh, here comes Lou Anarumo on his second-half adjustments. But they were true.
It happened.
They were real. And then when you weren't seeing those adjustments being made in live time, you're going like, hey, Lou, man, the reason we like to hear is because the game plan, the talent wasn't always there, but you figured out a way to turn things around in the second half. And he did in the second half of the year, I guess, in the last 5 games. Yeah. But I think that Steelers game is the exact moment where the ownership group, who doesn't fire people mid-season, goes, all right, we gotta do that. We gotta change something here. We'll let it ride out through the rest of the year. And, he's gone. But to answer your original question about players, yes, I have faith in that they can, with reps, continue to grow. And as for Lou Anarumo, I think his fate was sealed 6 weeks ago.
I think you're absolutely right, and that's something we're going to get into here in a bit. But finishing the season on a 5-game win streak, I know at least first my removing beating the Steelers, because obviously that's extenuating circumstances where that win is great. But to end the season on a 5-game win streak after you lose to the Steelers the first time, and it's already a mathematical uphill climb to get into the playoffs, I'm a big draft guy. And a lot of these weeks, I was looking at how each win was costing us 3-4 spots in the draft. And when you win 5 games at the end of the season and you go from a top 10 pick to picking 17th, that's a big slip in terms of the type of value you can have, not just in the first round, but even as you get down into the later rounds of the draft. But how much does a 5-game win streak do other than just try to get you into the playoffs? And I think that's a big thing that I overlooked quite a bit during it, and even immediately following Sunday when the Bengals were eliminated. I think with who Zack Taylor is and who he's built this team into, culture comes first. Or if it's not first, it's very, very high on the list. We talk about what Zack Taylor's good at. I'm a guy, and I think Reed is too, that believes that he's a pretty dang good play caller as well in certain situations. But everyone can agree that he has a great culture. And that's what we saw show through in these last 5 weeks. And we kill coaches all the time across all sports when the season is quote unquote over and players pack it in and call it quits. Well, that didn't happen with the Bengals. The Bengals played as hard as they could for the last 5 weeks, and they scratched and clawed and got 5 wins. And it wasn't quite enough to get into the playoffs, but I think this is very reassuring for what Zack Taylor's building here off the field and how everyone is reacting to having a chance to fight with the guys on this roster for another week and another week and another week. And that's what they did, because every single loss would have been elimination, and they chose to keep going. And I think that does mean something for the future of this team and just where we're at right now. In a disappointing season, it would have been easy to pack it in, and they didn't do that.
Yeah. You're a draft guy, and I get the logic around wanting a better draft pick, right? But you hit on all the reasons why you continue to compete in this league.
Yeah.
Unless you've got a legit shot at a generational player or a top 5 pick, and like, hey, what's the difference between going 6-10 and going 4-12 or whatever, or 4-13 now that we play 17 games? Unless you've got a real shot at that, you win games. You attempt to win games because what's the old Lombardi quote is winning's contagious, so is losing. And you've got to continue. It's confidence, man.
Right.
You've got to instill in these young players, you are winners. You belong, regardless of what the media says, regardless of what the own fan base says. This is a winning franchise now. 4 straight winning seasons. And granted, no playoffs to show for the last 2 years, but this is a winning franchise, and it's going to continue being a winning franchise under Joe Burrow. That's absolutely why you continue to win games, and that's why it's so paramount to instill that in the young players. We can talk about getting reps for the young players in those games and how great it was to see the defense play and certain players on the offense play in those last few weeks. You amplify it tenfold by also winning the games.
100%.
It feels so much better in a locker room. It feels so much better in a clubhouse. It feels so much better on a team plane when you're coming home from a win, when you're celebrating a win, than the quietness, the empty void of nothingness that is a locker room after a loss. That's what Zack Taylor is building. That's why the people that do like Zack Taylor in Cincinnati, and the numbers are dwindling. I don't know where I fit.
Yeah.
I certainly lean more towards liking him. But the people that do like him, this is what they believe in, is his ability to build a chemistry, his ability to build a locker room and get them to believe in themselves.
Colin Will does ask a good point while we're on that 5-game win streak. He says that 5-game win streak is what saved Zack Taylor's job. And if you truly believe that Lou Anarumo was fired against the Steelers and the front office already had their mind made up, I can tell by the look you're giving me right now what your answer is. Was there ever a point this season where Taylor's seat got hot? And I'll follow that up with, is it at all warm right now going into next year?
4-13 would have gotten. I think they would have absolutely had to make a move to where they just didn't even look competitive. But even how many games this year did the Bengals not look competitive? Because that's oftentimes why you fire the Eagles game.
Even then, we are a swing pass to Jamar away from that being competitive.
Right. Every other game, the Commanders game, we were never really in. The Commanders game, I'd say we were never really in. We were always trailing 2 scores for the most part once the second half started. But you fire coaches that have had success when things start to spiral out of control. It never spiraled out of control. And then secondly, you fire coaches that have had success. And I am saying that Zack Taylor has had success considering he's won 5 playoff games here, which before he took over the job, that's how many playoff wins the Cincinnati Bengals had in their history. They never looked uncompetitive. Never once. The defense did, but as a team, they competed in every single game. So, no, I don't think Zack Taylor's job was ever on the chopping block. His contract's up after next year, correct? I think he's got 1 more year on the thing. They're not going to get an extension. So, yeah, the seat's going to be warm. Do I think he's a lame duck coach? No, he's not a lame duck coach in the same way that Matt Eberflus was or Mike McCarthy was. No, he's not like that to where he tells a player something, they're going to be like, yeah, whatever, coach, and you're going to be gone here next year, and I'll be here next year. It's not like that whatsoever, but the seat is certainly going to be warm into where if the expectations are that this team wins playoff games and competes in playoff games, no matter how competitive the AFC is, especially from a quarterback range. But no, he was never going to get fired this year unless it unraveled at the seams. Yes, he might get fired after next year if things don't go well. Now, I will say that if it's another 9-8 season, I still don't think he'll get fired.
Agreed.
Like, if it's the exact same thing where it's 9-8 and you miss the playoffs, and then I'll be a little upset. 3 straight years of missing the playoffs in prime Joe Burrow years. But the seat's warm. It's not hot. It's warm, and it can get warmer. But as it sits right now, it just is what it is.
This season was an abject failure when you look at what the expectations were for the Bengals coming into the season. And that's the only reason we're even having that conversation. I think it's an incredible uphill battle for the Bengals to ever move off of Zack Taylor. I just don't think with what he's done for the organization and what we've seen them do with coaches who did way less before him, I don't think he's going anywhere. You're absolutely right. But the fact that 9-8 is viewed at as so bad in Cincinnati now. Missing the playoffs by one game is viewed at as such a failure in Cincinnati now. Is there any solace to be had in that? Is there any joy to be had that we're a team now that views themselves as a perennial contender and falling this far away from the playoffs when we'd usually say not that long ago that this was a great season, that we scratched and clawed and almost got there? Now we have a guy named Joe Burrow and all of a sudden, bang, expectations change and we're upset about this. I think that shows something for how far we've come, and we should kind of recognize that as a fan base.
Quick correction, 2 more years. So I do think that he can get fired next year, but yeah, you are right. I've had this take, I've said it on Off the Bench a few times, that Bengals fans need to kind of shed the old Bengals fandom off them, that we are perennial losers, that we're a cheap organization. And while a lot of those things, it doesn't change in one night. Rome wasn't built in a day. A lot of that is true. This is not the same Bengals that you grew up watching, to where everything was going to be done worse, where everything was going to be done cheaper, to where they're not going to have consistent winning, to where they're not going to have consistent output as a franchise. The reason that it feels so crummy 9-8 is because the aspirations are higher. And that's the negative of being where the Bengals were, right? Not everything good in life is just 100% good. You go to the Super Bowl, you go to the AFC Championship, that's great. That's where your team is. That's where you want to be. The bad part of that is when you have, I don't want to call it mediocre, but yeah, mediocre season against the schedule. Yeah, mediocre season. It's going to feel like a gut punch. It's gonna feel like you just went 4 rounds with prime Tyson, and that's okay. I don't know, like that's where you want to be as a fan. You are absolutely right. I don't know if you take solace of it, but you don't feel these things if this was the Bengals team right when Marvin Lewis took over. Marvin Lewis took over, they immediately went 7-9, 8-8, and everyone's like, man, this team has turned it around. That's not what happened here. We went to the Super Bowl the first year that we were good. Went to the AFC Championship the second year we were good. And we backed those up with back-to-back winning seasons. Missed the playoffs, but winning seasons. And it feels like a gut punch. That's new. It's going to feel weird. It's going to feel unique. But these are, I guess, good problems to have. If there is such a thing as a good problem to have, it is that 9-8 isn't cutting it anymore in Cincinnati.
Right, and I think that is a good problem to have, but there's a long list of problems above that we have to worry about this offseason in terms of fixing this team, and that now we'll start with coaches, but I think the biggest thing that we have to look at going into this offseason is where has the organizational structure failed with setting this team up for success? You have a career year from Joe Burrow. You have a triple crown from Jamar Chase. You lead the league in sacks from Trey Hendrickson, and you still don't have enough help in the building to get you into the playoffs, to get you into the dance, to keep you playing football in January. And whose fault is that? I know a lot of people want to point to Zack Taylor. We both just said that we don't think his seat is quite hot yet to where it's his fault that this season happened like this. Obviously, the front office views Lou Anarumo as the culprit to this upsetting season with the way the defense played and already firing him less than 24 hours after being eliminated from playoff contention. But the front office isn't going to say it's themselves. And I think it's pretty clear at this point in everyone's Bengals fandom, as much as we pay attention to the team, that it is the front office and it is the GM, it's the scouting department or lack thereof, and everything about how the Bengals handle themselves in the offseason that makes them play with one arm tied behind their back when it comes to trying to compete for a Super Bowl. And hopefully that changes. But I think that's the biggest thing we have to look at now, because during the Andy Dalton time with Marvin Lewis, it was always, well, if we get that world beater at quarterback, well, maybe that's the thing. It's just Andy Dalton. We won't get there. Now we have that. And it's something else holding us back. And I think it has to be the front office.
Yeah, it's kind of like being in the Big Ten and not having the same facilities as Michigan or Ohio State, and now the same NIL collective. It's almost the exact same thing, to where you're not starting at the same start line that every other team is, right? You're not starting where the Philadelphia Eagles, who are well run, who the Baltimore Ravens, the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are in our own division, that are just better ran than we are. That there's something setting the Bengals back, and it's almost like debt, to where when one thing starts taking back a little bit, right? When you're not developing players.
Oh no. Well, we lost Readeroo, but that's all right. We'll oh, you're back.
Wife called me. So
there we go.
Right in the middle of it, she heard I was in her makeup studio. She's like, "Don't touch the contour," and I was like, "You might have to stop me from that."
Too late.
But no, it's everything is with one hand tied behind the back. That's kind of the phrase that every reporter uses. That's how handicapped this team is. That's how we kind of run this organization, and that's just. It almost feels like one of those things that's heading in the right direction. We're gonna get there eventually. I think the notion is they want to. The ownership wants to change how the organization is thought of. It's going to take time. You're not going to all of a sudden hire 10 new scouting members. You're not all of a sudden going to build a brand new state-of-the-art facility that looks like Hogwarts, like the Baltimore Ravens. You're all of a sudden going to do all these things of what good teams have done for decades. It's going to take time to get there. But I also don't like necessarily complaining about it all that much, because it's just the reality of which we have. And we've got to, it's pushed against us. It's an uphill climb, but it is what it is. So you've just got to figure out how to get around it.
I saw some replies to the Lou Anarumo fired tweet, and we'll get into those coaching changes now, but I saw some replies to that tweet saying, this isn't going to change anything. When's Duke Tobin getting fired? I said, oh, man, if you're holding your breath for the director of player personnel that has been the director of player personnel since 1999 to get fired, you're going to be waiting a long, long time. I think when it comes to coaching changes, or any change, really, in this organization going into this offseason, every one that I thought was possible to be made was made basically a day after the season ended. Lou Anarumo fired, D-line coach fired, linebackers coach fired, and O-line coach Frank Pollock fired, and all of them are going their separate ways next year. Bengals are going to have, or Zack Taylor, I should say, will have an ability to overhaul his entire staff. And I think one important piece that we found out after these firings during a Zack Taylor press conference that is very, I don't want to say unique. I think a lot of elite coaches have control over their staff and everything like that, but everyone wouldn't put Zack Taylor in the elite category. And he said that it was his decision to let go of all these coaches, and he made that decision alone. First and foremost, do you believe him? Do you think that was the case? And second, what do you think that could mean for Zack Taylor in the future as we look at how it plays out here with these new hires?
No, I don't believe him. But I also respect the move to going like, I run this ship, right? This is my team. This is my organization. Regardless of what everyone wants to say, I run the ship here. But no, I don't believe him whatsoever. But I do respect him just going like, hey, this is the way that I run business here. It starts and stops with Zack Taylor.
We gotta believe
here
that.
In Cincinnati, which. Right, it's a little silly to believe.
Michael Rolfe with a super chat, a $20 super chat from Michael Rolfe. Burrow deserves better. It's important the fans refuse to accept mediocrity. That seems like a shot. For so long, the city has just accepted it. The insane stadium tax deal, the 90s teams losing in the playoffs 5 years in a row. ... Plenty of stuff you can put after those dots. Certainly has been a rough life as a Cincinnati sports fan, and we thought, you say it all the time, when Joe Burrow and the Bengals got to the playoffs in 2021, we thought we'd just make it to the playoffs every single year. It was a Patriots fandom then. Our season started in January, and obviously the last 2 years that hasn't been the case. I will say one thing: I do think it was up to Zack Taylor. I think Zack Taylor made these coaching changes.
Really?
I would say I don't know about on his own, but I think he certainly was the one that put these on the table and said that it was time to make these moves. And whether the front office agreed with him and went with his say or not, I think it was up to him. And the only reason I'll say that is I think the front office gave him an ultimatum and basically said, you either can have, one last ride with Lou and we'll see if it works out with the old band of brothers, or you fire him and you extend yourself by about a year or two while we see how these new pieces work together and how they're able to progress the young talent on the team and everything like that. Or I've seen some people as well, not the camp I fall in, but I've seen some people as well suggest that they said, Zach, it's you or them type of thing. And Zach decided that it was best to change some of the staff. I think that's a little bit far, but I don't think it's too much of a stretch for Zach to be firing Lou Anarumo because he thinks it extends himself a little bit. We see head coaches give up play calling. We see head coaches fire coordinators. We see reshufflings of staffs, really anything to shake it up and extend themselves a little bit. I've been in the Zack Taylor's not on the hot seat camp the whole time, but that quote, since I do choose to believe him a little bit, I think it leads me to believe that maybe he's going to be tied to these next hires pretty tight. I think whoever Zack Taylor brings in as the next DC, and whoever that DC brings in as the rest of his staff in terms of linebackers and D-line, and then the run game and pass game coordinator at the offensive line position or coach position, I think these are going to be huge, huge hires for the future of Zack Taylor in Cincinnati and how he's viewed from the fans. I know, especially in our chat right now, a lot of anti-Zack Taylor sentiment and all around the city for sure. And I think if he can hit this defensive coordinator hire out of the park and get an offensive line coach that can turn this around, though I think the offensive line success is going to be dependent on bringing in new bodies and not exactly just a replacement of Frank Pollock. I think Zack Taylor has married himself with whoever this next defensive coordinator is pretty tightly.
So before I get into my thoughts about firing Lou, and I have pretty strong opinions on that. If you truly believe that next DC and Zach are going to be married together, knowing that Zach's seat at the very least is warm, right? A little, it's warmer than room temperature. If you know that, how can you imagine that we're going to get a top tier defensive coordinator? You know what I'm saying? Because then they'll look at it and be like, that's a one and out job if I don't succeed. I got 1 year to succeed. Now the odds are pretty decent that I do succeed based off Joe Burrow's on one side. And, even though you play in a tough division, you play in a tougher conference, all those things, it seems like it's going to work out more often than it doesn't. But how are you going to be able to go job security knowing that your job's going to be tied up to Zack Taylor and he might lose his job in a year?
And that's fair. I think the big thing for me is I think any of those top-name defensive coordinators that I've pointed to so far, the Salas, the Staleys, the Dennis Allens of the world, I think they're a 2-year hire however it goes. I think they're either fired with Zack Taylor because it goes poorly. If Robert Saleh coaches the defense of the Bengals to a Super Bowl, he's gone in 2 years as well to be a head coach. So that's kind of the way I'm viewing this is I think if the Bengals do go for one of those big names, I think they're gone in 2 years, whether it goes great or poorly.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. And, people don't like to talk a whole lot about Bengals success of coordinators and everything like that, but we do have a pretty decent track record of promoting coordinators to being head coaches. I mean, Lou Anarumo got head coaching jobs and interviews. And we thought for sure he was going to get his job. Now, on to Lou Anarumo. And I know some people, very few, it's a small minority of people that were like, I don't like, Lou wasn't the problem and everything like that. I don't know how Lou could have kept his job. He's been our defensive coordinator for 6 years. I put this tweet out a couple of days ago. He's been our defensive coordinator for 6 years. We've had a top 16, top half of the league, one of those 6 years. The year we went to the Super Bowl, they were 17. So that's outside of the top half. And that's fine. And even if every other year they're in the bottom third. So, this hasn't been a good defense. And I know we have two runs, two playoff runs where the defense played very, very well. And they were the 7th-ranked defense in 2022, which is probably the best Bengals team of my lifetime. That team played great almost every single week. But, I just don't understand how you can say this guy can keep his job. He's the second longest tenured Bengals defensive coordinator in the history of the franchise. Wow. Second longest, tied with Mike Zimmer, but like tied for second behind Dick LeBeau. Wow. Like, it's like, those are great defensive coordinators. Did anyone think Lou Anarumo was this otherworldly defensive coordinator? No. Even when he was getting head coaching job interviews, we're like, they can have him. That kind of thing. So, like, I just don't understand where there's any sentiment whatsoever that Lou deserved to keep his job, and especially because the great majority of resources that the Bengals have had over the past few years have been spent towards the defense. Because about 3 years ago, other than the offensive line, we kind of had the offense figured out, right? We had the quarterback. That's great. A lot of money's being spent over there, but we used the first overall pick, and then the next year, used our first round pick the next year, our second round pick the year that we picked Joe, all towards T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow. We had Joe Mixon already there, and pretty much everything else has been spent towards the defense in years past. And to lose credit, and the whole defensive coaching staff's credit, we brought in all these free agents, and they worked the first time around, right? Trey Hendrickson worked. Von Bell worked. DJ Reader, Ogunjobi, Eli Apple, Awuzie, they all worked other than Trey Waynes. Like, almost every bam, 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 hit. Since then, none of the picks have really worked. I'd say Cam Taylor-Britt's been fine.
Yeah.
Logan Wilson's been fine. Jermaine Pratt's been fine, sure. But every other pick, what do we got there? So there's not development.
Right.
And when we bring in players that have succeeded elsewhere, guys like Nick Scott, guys like, I'm drawing a blank here, guys
Rankins.
like Sheldon Rankins. Yeah, and guys like Geno Stone, who did have a better second half of the year. Those guys that have succeeded elsewhere, they come into our fold, and it doesn't pan out. It's pretty similar to what happened with Frank Pollock and why he lost his job as offensive line coach. Because we bring in these guys that have succeeded elsewhere, they get here, it doesn't work anymore. That doesn't compute. That doesn't compute in my brain. So, yeah, they had to clean house on the defensive side. They had to. I don't know how you could watch this year. I don't know how you could watch this Bengals season, and we talk the entire year, this defense is what's holding the Bengals back. This defense is what's holding the Bengals back. Two different 10-point leads against the Ravens. This defense is what's holding the team back. This defense. 44 points, 520 yards against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And then at the end of the year, we fire everyone, and some people are like, I don't get it. We knew this was coming. It was a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Like, you didn't even have to think about it. Season's over. These guys are done. Sorry.
No, absolutely, yeah. I think the only reason Bengals fans had talked themselves into Lou Anarumo staying is because we've learned over the years that wouldn't have been a surprising Bengals move. It would have been a surprising move for the other 31 teams, but after Week 18 and a 5-game win streak, I was about 60-40 that he stays. And some people misconstrued that as me saying I wanted him to stay, and that's not at all what I was saying. This is a great step outside of that organizational box for the Bengals to fire some of these guys that are under contract, and I think it's a good sign for how this offseason is going to go, because in order to compete with a quarterback that we're paying what we pay Joe and wide receivers getting paid what we're going to pay Jamar and T, we have to operate like a championship team, and that's different than the way we've ever operated in the past, and this is a start to putting money in number 2 and putting winning number 1. And I think we got a long way to go till that's actually the mindset of this Bengals organization. But this is certainly a good start. The Bengals did have 2 interviews today for the open defensive coordinator position. Patriots defensive coordinator DeMarcus Covington and Raiders defensive coordinator Patrick Graham. Patrick Graham was also on the Jaguars list of head coach interviews. He's been interviewed by at least 2 teams in the last 3 cycles. So a highly respected coach that has had the Raiders defense as top half of the league unit in his entire tenure there. And it's important to note as well, with those numbers not necessarily jumping off the page, that outside of Max Crosby, they are the Raiders. And there's not a whole lot of talent on that side of the ball. And he's done a really good job getting the most out of a lot of young players. You talk about getting successful players to Cincinnati and having them fall off. The exact opposite has happened in Vegas under Patrick Graham. They signed Clavon Chasen, a former first-round pick on that 2019 LSU team from the Jaguars this offseason, and Chasen had the best year of his career, starting to show a little bit of why he was that first-round pick. I think with the firing of, sorry, I'm blanking on his name, the Raiders head coach they just fired today.
Antonio Pierce.
With the firing of Antonio Pierce and the Bengals also having an open linebacker coach role, which is what Pierce was before that, interviewing Patrick Graham, I think it makes a lot of sense to bring Graham in as the DC if that interview went well, and then have potentially Antonio Pierce as your linebackers coach. I think that's a way to kind of get the best of both worlds in terms of experience and a big name on the market.
Yeah, the thing about Graham is what's interesting is Marvin's over there, right? Marvin Lewis has pieces there. You can get in his ear, and I'm sure Marvin even I would be shocked if Marvin still doesn't communicate with high ups here in Cincinnati, just because he had such a long tenure here. They seem to have split amicably, so it wouldn't surprise me at all if there's some communication between both Graham and Marvin and the Bengals being like, hey, this guy really knows his stuff. DeMarcus Covington, haven't seen a whole lot of people talk about him on X.com. And I think part of it's because he was the Patriots DC, and the Patriots weren't very good in his 1 year being the DC, so he's only had 1 year as a DC. That being said, I'll look at this. You look at coordinators that have worked in Cincinnati over the history, and there's a common theme. One theme is that they're either the sons of coaches. You're talking like Jay Gruden, you're talking Mike Zimmer, you're talking Brian Callahan, guys that have coached at a very high level, and you grew up in kind of that system, or you came from a great, like you come from the same locker room as an elite Hall of Fame coach. About Zack Taylor, and I know someone brought it in here, AJ Worst, talking about no other team would have hired Zack Taylor because he was the passing game coordinator under Sean McVay. Probably not, but he's been okay since he's been here. That's all fine. But he came from Sean McVay, and that's the main part of why he got fired. Sean McVay was the hottest commodity in football, rightfully so, still should be around there because he seems to be a fantastic coach. So when I look at DeMarcus Covington, I say, all right, who did you mentor under in your professional career? Oh, this guy named Bill Belichick, who is the greatest defensive mind the sport has ever seen. The guy that was the DC on those Giants teams that we still talk about those Giants teams to this day because that's how good you were. And the guy that led an organization and won 6 Super Bowls because of a defensive-minded head coach. That's where you learned how to be a coach from. That's cool with me. I'm cool with that. And I'm not going to go through all these guys' resumes and go, I don't know any of them. I don't know how smart they are. I don't know how wicked they are. All I can look at is where you've been. And if you've been in Bill Belichick's locker room, if you've been in a coach's meeting with Bill Belichick, that checks a box for me. That checks a box for me.
Yeah, the only worry I have with Covington is I'm having flashbacks to last offseason. The Bengals had a couple big needs, and they went out and got Sheldon Rankins, who had 3.5 sacks against the Bengals. They went out and got Geno Stone, who had 3 picks against the Bengals. If they have a DC opening, and everyone's been talking about the Patriots game the whole offseason since we got eliminated, they just go get the DC that shut down the Bengals offense. I don't know. It doesn't make me feel too good about that one. But we have another super chat. Sean Krutka, sorry if I butchered that pronunciation, but a $5 super chat. If they hire someone who's coached for them recently, like Covington or Golden, it would show the continued laziness of this organization. A new voice is needed. I would push back on that a little bit. I know that that's an easy way to examine the Bengals right now. If they go with someone they're familiar with, it's not a good way for the Bengals to operate. And normally I would agree. That's exactly where I sat with the Reds opening this offseason. I said the Reds have been a dumpster fire organizationally for a while. If we have an opening, we have to make change now. Why do we go hire someone that's already been here? And I think to a degree, I agree with the sentiment that he has here with why would you go hire someone that was in this organization if we want to change this organization? I would push back on the one name he threw in there as an example, Al Golden. Al Golden was the linebackers coach here in Cincinnati when we went to the Super Bowl. He had Jermaine Pratt and Logan Wilson playing at a level where the Bengals extended both off-ball linebackers, and the vast majority of fans were like, yeah, no, of course we did. They're absolute ballers. And then now he goes to Notre Dame and is their defensive coordinator. They have one of the best secondaries in the country. They have one of the best overall defenses in the entire country. And then if he wants to come back to Cincinnati, if he has an itch to get back into the league, I don't think that's a normal reunion in terms of the Bengals just taking the easy way out and hiring someone that they're familiar with. I think that's a marquee name on the market that's going to have a lot of NFL interest over the coming years, and I think that'd be a good get for the Bengals. The only other name that I think is important to throw out there as we're going through this, Robert Livingston is the current Colorado defensive coordinator under Deion Sanders out in Boulder. He was the former defensive backs coach for the Bengals just a few years ago. Yep. So another one of those familiarity hires that we're talking about here, if he could want to come back to the league as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see a guy that's at least been a DC in professional football. Right?
Completely
I don't believe
fair.
Robert Livingston. Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
I
completely fair.
That's a big jump from the Big 12 to here calling plays. There is something that I think T. Brookie brought it in there when I was talking about DeMarcus Covington, is he says Belichick coaches have not done well in other places. That's half fair. There's plenty of coaches that have coached under Bill Belichick that have succeeded. Nick Saban comes to mind.
Also,
pretty quickly.
Coordinator head coach difference. Brian Flores failed as a head coach, often used there. One of the best defensive coordinators in football right now.
Patricia, who really hasn't gotten another shot to be a DC, I think he still probably can call some plays on the defensive side of the ball. Making him an OC probably was a little questionable back there, Bill. But regardless, like the DC has worked, and it's the defensive side of the ball that he's got to worry about. So yeah, I get the idea that Bill's coaches haven't done well. I think that's a little a bad faith argument, because I think there's been plenty that have done just fine. And you're right, DC is not the same as being head coach.
No, and I think the big difference here between what people want at the defensive coordinator position is the debate between one of those big names and an up-and-comer that you hope can be here for a long time. I think the worry, and I've seen Colin Will put it in the chat here a couple times, the worry is that if Zack Taylor does truly have control of the situation, if he is pulling the strings here, would he hire someone that is an easy interim head coach? I know we said the Bengals don't ever do in-season fires. We said his seat is just a little bit warm, but with as convinced everyone is that he's going to get fired next year, do you think that would even be a little bit of something in the back of his mind coming into play as they're looking for a defensive coordinator hire this offseason?
Let me put it this way. If your job's on the line and the main concern in your brain is, hire somebody that could help my job be so good at his job that he's going to overtake my job if it doesn't work out, I think that's a silly thing to think about. I think I'm not saying that that's like completely ludicrous of a notion, but no one's thinking that way. I can tell you right now, without knowing Zack Taylor, that he's not worried about, hey, I hope I don't get somebody who's so good. That's so good that if I start not doing my job, he's going to take it. No. It's not like that. He's trying to find the best guy. The thing that I would be concerned about if I'm a Bengals fan, which I am, thinking about if Zack Taylor's the main guy driving this defensive coordinator search, is Zack hasn't been a whole lot of places. He was at UC. He's with Sean McVay, and that coaching tree has pretty much ran its course. He hasn't been a whole lot of places. He doesn't have a whole lot of connections. That's what I'd be more concerned about than anything else.
And another $5 super chat. Drew Garrison, good friend of the program, says, hard to decide which host is more handsome tonight. Thank you, Drew. We appreciate it. Well, easy to decide now because there's only one host. I would assume Reed's getting another call and he'll be back momentarily. There he is. She Oh no! He's gone again. Well, this is going just swimmingly down the stretch here.
She really wants me to get out of the Alta studio here, the Alta makeup room, the $1 million room.
Not enjoying it. Well, we got 10 minutes left on tonight's Chatterbox Bengals. Apologies to Mariana for keeping Reed for so long. But as we move off the coaching firings, which have been the biggest story of the offseason so far, we got to talk about where we go from here. And I think it's one of the easiest offseason lists ever. In terms of ranking the needs. A couple years ago, it was pretty easy. Number one, extend Joe Burrow. Everything else, cherries on top. At this offseason, number one, extend Jamar. Number 2, extend T. Reed's gone again. And then number 3, I don't know where you necessarily go from there, but we know the first thing you have to do this offseason is extend the 2 wide receivers. I think I know where you stand. It's been a while since we've talked about it on Chatterbox programming. It always gets a little muddied in my head what's on air and what's not when it comes to conversations in the studio. But extending T. Higgins, not do you want him, where do you fall on whether or not it's going to get done?
Preseason, 0% is where I was at. Preseason was 0%. But if you like reading the tea leaves, if you like when your franchise quarterback is kind of pulling the strings, when you do all that stuff, it becomes a little more bad. I was at 0% preseason. I think I'm there at like 60% now to where he's back next year. 60 to 70% is if he's back next year. Everything that could be trending in the right direction is trending that way. Right? He changes his agent. Joe's talking about it publicly. Zach's talking about it publicly. Those are all great things. Now, I will never – I know I'm the positive Bengals fan here. I will never over or underestimate the cheapness of Mike Brown.
That's a good point.
So I won't get it up to 80 or 90%. I will certainly say about 70% that I think that T. Higgins comes back.
I think a lot of people get wrapped up in the cap number. And obviously having $120 million locked up in 3 players on the offensive side of the football when your offense is elite and your defense is a clear need, that's hard to swallow for some. And it is for me, absolutely, when we talk about this. But I think the big difference where the Bengals are at right now, and it's something that I keep coming back to, is there aren't other cornerstone pieces on this team. Trey Hendrickson is a 30-year-old. He's an elite pass rusher. But if we're mapping out the plan for this Bengals defense, when these young players come on and the draft picks we hit come on in their prime, Trey Hendrickson's well past his, and he's probably done. So I don't even count him as a major extension candidate on this team, though it could be a year or 2 extension to have him dribble it out down the line. I certainly understand that. But Cam Taylor-Britt, a guy that we thought coming into this year, maybe one of those cornerstone pieces, maybe a guy that could get big money. We were hoping maybe Miles Murphy or Dax Hill could come on and prove that they're one of those cornerstone pieces. When you look at this roster right now, outside of Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase, there's not a whole lot else that you're expecting to pay big extension money. And I think that makes the T. Higgins negotiation and debate on whether or not to bring him back that much easier, because going into this season, I think a lot of the conversation was we got to spend this money elsewhere. And now you're sitting there looking at it and said, we couldn't spend this money elsewhere if we tried to. This free agency market isn't elite. And that's the other thing I keep going back to. A lot of people say you can't spend $30 million on a wide receiver when you could spend that $30 million on an edge rusher or a corner or a safety. I don't think the Bengals are going to do that. I think the only $30 million free agent that it's possible for the Bengals to sign this offseason is T. Higgins in an extension. They're just not going to go out and give Javon Holland $20 million to be a star safety, or go trade for a Max Crosby for, hold on. I'll use a different name, because if we get Anthony Pierce and the DC from Vegas, maybe Max Crosby does come play in stripes. Right. But they're not going to trade for Myles Garrett or anything like that. I think the blue chip guy in free agency the Bengals have a chance to get is T. Higgins. And I think Joe Burrow said it best. You can't let that talent walk out of the building. You just can't do it. They did it with Jesse Bates, and we talk about it consistently. I don't care where you stand on it. I know that Reed and I both necessarily don't think it was the worst move, but the fact that we talk about it as much as we do shows that it was at least relatively a problem, or at least the plan to replace him has been absolutely horrible. The Bengals have not been able to replace elite talent really ever when it leaves. Really? Let Zeitler leave. They've been struggling for a guard. They let Whitworth leave, struggling for a tackle.
Well, so no, when you say that the plan to replace Jesse Bates has been terrible, I don't think the plan was terrible.
The execution of the plan was terrible.
Correct.
My bad.
And that's where you and I agree that you should grade the process more than you grade the result. That being said, and I've fought the wrong fight. If you could say anything else about me, it's I admit when I'm wrong. And I fought the Jesse Bates fight for 2 years now, And all it took for me to realize that I was probably wrong was someone go, I'm not pro letting elite talent walk out the door. Casey McAllister said that to me. I'll tell you. I remember exactly where I was sitting. He goes, I don't like letting elite talent walk out the door. And I literally went, never thought of it like that. So, yes, if you've got an elite player, regardless of how valuable you think his position is, regardless of how easy it is you think he is to replace in the aggregate, when he's an elite talent, you don't let him walk out the door. And you are absolutely right when you say that the most likely guy that the Bengals will spend top market money for at a position is a guy that's probably already here, and that's T. Higgins. A guy that we already know what it looks like when he's out on the field. Now, there's injury problems. They still should scare me.
Right.
They still should scare you as fans as saying, all right, we give this guy $30 million. We've already known that he has soft tissue injuries, and he's going – I mean, it'll be – we should go to church and pay our tithes if T. Higgins plays 17 regular season games.
Yes.
Because I just think we know that probably isn't going to happen. But we also know what this team is, which is what we think it is, a Super Bowl contender. It looks like that when T. Higgins is on the field. This offense looks like an elite offense when T. Higgins is on the field. And we got to keep that going as long as possible. I'm with you. I don't know how you feel when you see the other big name free agents come across your X feed where everything happens. Did I do that?
It's the everything. Right? It's the everything.
Everything.
Yeah.
The everything app. Okay. When X comes across and they go Bengals, the leading odds to get Buda Baker.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I literally closed the app. I'm like, that ain't happening because we know that's not happening. I mean, listen, it's what, January 7th. If in a couple months we sign Buda Baker, I'm on board. I'm all for it, and that's great. Everything's all gravy train, but that's not going to happen. So let's stop talking about it, maybe. But yeah, I think T. Higgins, I'm at 70% where he's coming back.
We talked about how we need organizational change this offseason in order to believe in the Bengals in the near future, and we got that with the firing of Lou Anarumo. I think the next step, even before the extension of the wide receivers, is the cuts. We have to see what the Bengals are willing to do in terms of eating dead money on their books. There's a couple names that jump off the page right away as the season ends that should certainly be on their way out of Cincinnati. Sheldon Rankins' career in the city ended unceremoniously with an illness keeping him out for the final stretch of the season. His time in Cincinnati almost certainly coming to a close. You can keep all the money on his second year of his contract off the books with a simple cut, so he'll probably be on his way. The other names that jump off the page when you're looking at the numbers, Alex Kappa, potentially Geno Stone before those last few weeks, and then Sam Hubbard with his play at edge rusher. Are there any names that I missed that you think they'll certainly cut, or any of those that you want to push back on and think that'll be a Bengal next year?
We'll bring back Geno Stone. I think we'll bring back
Geno
Stone
I agree with that.
Yeah. Every other name you brought up might be on the chopping block. We'll probably bring back Sam Hubbard.
I think so too, but restructured. Don't freak out. Yeah.
Golly, if we bring him back at the same deal, you just can't. You just can't. I've been long on the Sam Hubbard train that if you're watching the Cincinnati Bengals play and he makes a routine play and a guy makes a routine play and you go, oh, that was nice. And that's what happens when Sam Hubbard, he literally stops a run for 2 yards. You're like, oh, good job, Sam. Maybe we shouldn't be paying that guy $10 million. You know what I'm saying? Like maybe we're not getting a dime. Like when Khalil Herbert was getting a carry on Saturday, which he looked terrible. I'm shocked that everyone was so on board with Khalil Herbert after 7 minutes of play in the Broncos game.
Don't be mean.
And when I'm just saying, like everyone's like, I liked what I saw with Khalil Herbert. I hope you take that back because he looked terrible. When Khalil Herbert's getting 2 yards and he kind of falls forward for a third, you're like, oh, that was nice, Khalil. Maybe we shouldn't bring a guy back. Sam Hubbard needs to be cut under his current contract. They can restructure it. I'm cool with that. It's good to have a leader in the clubhouse. Yeah. All that good stuff. But Sheldon Rankins is gone. Maybe I was wrong in hindsight when I said that this is what elite teams do. This is our Aaron Donald. This is our Vita Vea. This is our Chris Jones. I might have been a little off kilter there.
Yeah.
But Kappa, we've got to figure out something in the guard position. We've got to do all those things. So yeah.
Absolutely, and I think the one answer that is in the building potentially at guard is Cody Ford. Zack Taylor spoke very highly of him following the Week 18 game. We'll see what the Bengals' plans are for him. But that's going to wrap it up for our Week 18 recap and offseason preview episode. That's always a good time, and we'll get back to you guys momentarily within the coming days about what the plan will be for Chatterbox Bengals in the offseason. We're going to take a few weeks off, and then we'll attack the draft season with big boards and all the stuff for that you guys will need whenever anything happens in Bengals world. We'll certainly be live. Craig and I recorded a show right after Lou's firing yesterday, and we'll certainly keep that up all throughout the offseason. So stay tuned in and follow the Chatterbox socials for everything that goes along there. Thanks for joining me, Reed.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I get off this, I have no plans. I have no form of entertainment. Is there anything that you suggest to watch? I was hoping you'd ask. Trace Fowler will actually be doing a golf stream, I believe, for our members right after this one. So go ahead and actually, you don't have to do anything. Stay right here, and it'll redirect you right that way. So don't go anywhere. Enjoy the rest of your night with the rest of the Chatterbox programming, and thank you guys for tuning in. Hoo day, and I usually say we'll see you next time, but at this point, I guess we'll see you when we see you.